Let's give them a great big hand again. Simon, Marion, and Tono, Dave, and others I may not know about were involved in creating that and putting projections all over the building. I think we ought to give them a really big special hand for that. You know, most of us have grown up being taught a worldview in society, and for some of us, not me when I was younger, some in the room here being taught a worldview that's very different to what the science class teaches. The difficulty we have is that the views that are being expressed often in the science class and sometimes in the church are actually neither reliable, nor truthful, nor helpful to our understanding of who we are. I remember some time after becoming a Christian, being totally shocked when I realized that things weren't as I thought they were. When I realized that the world had a difference to it than I'd ever identified or understood. And so I want to talk about this morning. And with that great presentation, kind of thinking, well, we should do that at the end again. Because the truth of the matter is, have I just hit something wrong here? I've gone blank for some reason, guys. Okay. I've got it behind me. I just need to keep an eye there. All right. The truth of the matter is that some science is great science. And I want to say that at the beginning of this, because we often actually get a view which isn't helpful, because it seems to me that there are some people who would rate all scientists as dumb and some science people who rate all Christians as dumb. And I don't think that's either intelligent nor helpful. See, good science, in actual fact, has no presuppositions. And a presupposition is where you claim to already know something before you actually look at the thing you're looking at, before you work through the matters you're talking about. Because there are both evolutionists and creationists who are good scientists. We need to understand that. So I want to, first of all, start off with a little bit of a positive thought. The first thing I want to talk about this morning, there are points of agreement between evolutionists and the creationists. And I want to look at those points of agreement this morning. I've lost my screen at the back, so sorry about that. I have to keep peeking. Both believe the world had a beginning point. As you saw on the video just now, there's been a shift in the scientific world about what that might mean. And that shift didn't happen all that long ago. It wasn't that long ago that I preached on this, and that stuff that you saw on the screen today some of it had not been discovered. Last time I preached on this subject. So both believe the world had a beginning point. Both actually believe in tectonic plates. The tectonic plates are those parts of the earth that thought that the earth started off as one solid ball and then it spread, and that's why if you push it all back together again, all the pieces mostly fit together. And the tectonic plates, of course, the things that we look at in study of the geophysicists study the plates because they want to know how they move and what's going to happen, and they're the ones who really dig into whole things of earthquakes, not geologists. And often newspapers and the media get it wrong by going to a geologist to ask them all about earthquakes. They should ask the people who really are skilled in that area, not those who just have it as a side science. So both believe in that. Both believe dinosaurs existed. Both believe in radiometric decay. In other words, stuff slowly but surely decays. Carbon-14 decays, uranium decays, argon, all those things slowly but surely decay. Now that's an important thing. You may not see it as important, but you'll see it will be. Both believe in forms of natural selection. Both believe in molecules, atoms, and DNA. But we don't have all the answers. And the thing about all those things we both believe in, although we believe in them, we actually have different thoughts about what that might mean. So I want to say, first of all, if you're talking with somebody who is an avowed evolutionist or trying to explore the subject, don't try and pick, first of all, on the things you disagree on. There are some things here. I am here. It wasn't all that long ago, just a few hundred years, that there was one person who was meant to be a scientist who said, I'm not sure we even exist. And somebody else said, well, I'll pinch you and be real. But their argument went something along the lines of saying, well, you can't prove I'm here. Just because you pinch me and I say I feel pain, I'm not sure I'm actually here. You see, even in the world not so long ago, there are people who have these unusual ideas. And some Christians are just the same. I've heard Christians speak on this topic, and I shake my head and walk away in despair. Because it's not as simple as people might like to think. So I want to give us a little bit of an understanding of what the evolutionary theory is really talking about. Just a very brief sort of overrun so that we can see it. Really what's being said is that evolution happens like this. It starts off with a very small life form and develops into man and other things. That's the simplicity of it. And there's claims that there's evidence for this. So I want to look at it. Evolutionists preach progressive evolution. Now I use the word preach intentionally because they always have a go at some of us, the ones that are prone to doing this, about us preaching this thing. I want to say anybody who presents a view is preaching that view, all right? So let's put the playing field evenly here and say evolutionists preach in the same way that we do, with different reasoning. They just don't call it preaching normally. So it looks a little like this. They talk about this progressive thing and came to these conclusions. However, and this is a problem, there's a bunch of things that have proven not to be true. And I want to draw out on those things. And I want to say this. You see, the problems with the theory, what is the possibility of that happening? The probability of it happening was very well explained on the video. The background of that wasn't totally explained, but I forget how many 10 to the powers of hundreds a possibility of even one life form forming, let alone the development we have now. It's considered impossible by most people who study the science. There's dishonesty, and I want to talk about that, and there's systems failures, and I want to talk about that. The first one is the fraud problem. When I went to school in the 1950s and onwards, there were some things that we were given in science books, and particularly in the 60s, these science books came out, and first of all, I think 1960, some of the strongest ones came out. A scientist called Haeckel, his drawings of the eating habit and reproductive cycle of alleged moneuron, to which he gave the scientific name Protomyxa aurantiaca, okay, something like that, as published in his book. The problem is, this is the real problem, and some people still believe in this whole thing. In this book, The History of Creation, the extent of the detail is the measure of his fraud, as the monura did not then and do not now exist. And yet it was taught in our schools. And in some places it's still being taught. And the ironic thing is that it was before those books were published in New Zealand that Haeckel had been taken to court and proven to be fraudulent. And it was still put in books and printed and sent to us to study. Blatant lying. Can't call it anything else. Then Haeckel did this. He drew all these little things at the top there. They were drawings of supposed embryos of those different things. Fish, the salamander, the turtle, the chicken, the rabbit, and the human. And then Richardson came along with his team, and they took these actual photos of those ones, and they're very distinctly different. So Haeckel was trying to harmonise and say, look, we all have the same life forms at the beginning. We all look the same at the beginning. Then we have, there are photos of embryos at the tailbud stage of development. And you can see they are quite significantly different. And so the scientific world built the whole evolutionary thing around the life forms around Haeckel's drawings originally. And there's never been an apology for all those that were involved with Haeckel, because they were scientists who owned it. And I think they do owe an apology. Next, in terms of biology, we look at the life forms and we say, okay, man was meant to have evolved from a monkey through. I understand that based on the information presented as facts, it can seem possible. I understand that. The problem is the facts are faulty. Let's have a look at this particular drawing of this. These are the first 5 figures that are presented as some of the life forms. There are other ones as well that people have claimed. The first one, which was thought to be an original human, now experts have concluded that Lucy is actual fact a chimpanzee. Let's have a look at the others though. We have Heidelberg man. Heidelberg man is a non-person. Some anthropologists are now claiming that so-called Homo heidelbergensis is nothing more than a paleoanthropologist's construct. In other words, artists love to portray this guy as a hairy, stocky, beetle-browed ancestor of Neanderthals and modern humans that lived supposedly 800 to 200,000 years ago. Trouble is, it does not appear and has never existed. It was built from a jawbone that was considered by many to be normal human being. A whole body was built from one jawbone. I mean, I could take your jawbone, imagine what I could make you look like. You know, this is serious. Nebraska man, a farmer and part-time geologist named Harold Cook, who lived in Nebraska, found a single tooth that looked remarkably similar to an ape or a human molar. He sent it to Henry Osborne at Columbia University, who excitedly declared this fossil to be a tooth from a first ever discovered ape-like man in North America. Shortly after, an artist's impression of what the man of the tooth may have looked like showed up in a London periodical. And it was kept as a scientific presentation from a tooth. This is a kind of hoax and deception that's been going on. I like good science. I love good science, but I hate this kind of misrepresentation as much as I hate some representations that some Christians give that are not accurate. Right? Piltdown Man. Piltdown Man was turned out to be one of the most famous frauds in scientific history. A human cranium paired with an orangutan's jaw and teeth that had been very carefully coloured to make it look like human. And once again, build a whole human body out of this thing that wasn't even real. And the fraudster deceived people for a long time until it was discovered that it wasn't true. Peking Man disappeared. The suspect, Peking Man, was in China. The bones are in China. There's suspicion that they disappeared because the person that was proposing that it was an older man decided they need to make it disappear because it wasn't, in fact, true. There's no evidence to support it being true. So the next one. Neanderthal Man. Neanderthal Man is an interesting one because Neanderthal Man, it's been revealed that Professor Rainer Prost von Zieten, a professor at a university in Frankfurt, has been systematically lying about the ages of skulls he found, claiming that they were far older than they actually were. In one instance, he said that the skull was 21,300 years old, although it was only 1,300 years old. Another of the professor's sensational finds, the Bischoff Speyer woman, lived in 1300 BC and not 3,000 years old ago, and as he had claimed. While another one, Paderborn Sunday Man, dated at 27,400 years ago, only died a couple of hundred years ago in 1750, and it was proven to be the case. This is deception at the ultimate level, guys and ladies. This is really awful stuff. New Guinea Man, while he lives, still lives. So there's nothing old about him. Cro-Magnon Man, one of the earliest and best established fossils, is at least equal in physical and brain capacity to modern man. So what's the difference? And in modern man, this genius thinks we came from a monkey. And the Bible says in Romans 1:22, professing themselves to be wise, they became fools. I think that's a very good statement. You see, the fact of the matter is we do have a problem in society, and the fact that we are too open to deception by people who want to make a living out of their science. And I think that's got to be understood. I think there are pastors like that as well, who make a living but they don't have any faith. I've met some. A couple of them actually confessed to me that they don't have faith in Christ. They're not Baptists, by the way, and I'm not telling you who they are. The fact of the matter is, fraud can be strongly there. So I want to, in the light of that, I want to look at a creation view that looks at a more positive angle at the whole deal. You see, God created. I believe that. And there are some reasons why I do believe that. God sustains. I believe that because if God created and He didn't sustain, we're in trouble. Thirdly, the existence of the supernatural is to me proof of beyond doubt. Even if I had no other evidence, the existence of the supernatural would actually spell out God's involvement. I have seen spirits. I know many others have experienced them. I have seen God work in some very supernatural ways. I have experienced things in my life, and I've been very fortunate as a Christian to have had some of the experiences I've had. Not all Christians have had those experiences, but I have seen them personally. And when I pray, God answers my prayer. That can't be explained with science in any way. God actually has a purpose, I believe, And the purpose is us. Simply put. So let's have a real quick look. I want to go through. The fossil record that's there is not there at all. And we'll touch on a couple of things about that a little later. But all the claims about the fossil record are not actually accurate. There are fossils. There's no two ways about that. We all believe there are fossils. Some of us have seen them. But the problem is, if you have progressive evolution, you have any form of evolution whatsoever, you're going to see all the stages of development in the fossil records, and they're simply not there. They're simply not there. Fossils appear out of nowhere. No developed half stage between one and the next. Not even one half stage, let alone the multiple many stages that would have been claimed that would be needed. Secondly, cells, in terms of cells and evolution. If we look at it, even the simplest cell contains several thousand different kinds of proteins and billions of each kind, plus all kinds of DNA, RNA, and other highly complex molecules, along with many complex structures arranged in an incredibly complex system. The complexity of a simple cell, let alone life as we see it, is so great that evolution does not therefore equate with scientific knowns, erosions, radio halos, or whatever. So I want to quickly look at some things, and don't get lost in this. If you want copies of this later, I'm willing to send you some over the email, okay? The law of biogenesis. Spontaneous generation, the emergence of life from non-living matter, has never been observed, ever. The apple is a really good example of this. If you put an apple on the mantelpiece, it's got all the right amino acids and other things in the apple to actually cause it to regenerate into better life, all by itself, just there. And it doesn't. It dies. Everything is wrong about that. All considered evolutionists admit that based on scientific observation, life only comes from life. So take the apple, you get the seed, you plant it in the ground, and life comes from life. That's what happens. The next piece. Gradualism doesn't happen. I mentioned this very lightly before. All species appear with fully, developed organs. Now, some people will say, well, what about the birds? You know, you've got birds with big heavy beaks and birds with light beaks. And in fact, I should have put a photo up here of a bird that we saw in America that was really amazing. This bird was sitting in front of us, and it was flying. And all you can see of this bird, it's got a body, the long beak, and you can't see anything else. But it makes a noise, a wee humming noise. And I'll show you a photo one day, but somebody we made friends with gave us a photo taken at incredibly high speed, shutter speed. And this bird has wings. They're flying so fast that you can't see them with a human eye. Amazing. So the body looks like it's just a wee body just sitting there, you see. But there's wings going that fast that you can't see them. All right? So you know, all these things appear with fully developed organs. There's no half stages, no part stages. There are no gradual transitions at all. In terms of carbon-14, which is what they date things around a lot of, carbon-14, anything above 50,000 years old has no detectable carbon-14. Carbon dating is based around dating carbon-14. So how do they get, with carbon dating and other forms of dating too, the same problem occurs, how do they get so many million years out of that? If carbon-14 is going to disappear, the very thing they're testing. Therefore, carbon dating of seriously older objects is impossible. It is possible with newer objects because we know the way in which the stuff actually very, very slowly but surely dissipates. Next, in terms of the case for creation, in the beginning, O Lord, says the book of Hebrews, you laid the foundations of the earth, and the heavens are the work of your hands. Now, why did I put this scripture up? It's because right from Genesis, right through to Hebrews in the New Testament, there's this constant thought there. In fact, this is really a development of some of the sayings in the Old Testament. I believe this categorically. And it's not just because of things I've talked about. There's lots of other issues. You see, the evidences stack up in the sciences. And for those of you who don't know this, the whole global warming thing at the moment that's being hotly presented in the media, what most people don't realize is a huge... I mean, the last time I looked, I should have looked today and I forgot to do so. Last time I looked, there are over 30,000 significant scientists in the world who disagree with the conclusions that have been presented through the media. Now, they're not debating the fact there's some increase in temperature happening. They are debating what is being claimed about that. A very different thing altogether. When you look at the different scientists, and some of you won't even know what some of these sciences are, that's fine, you don't need to, but you'll recognize enough to realize that there's a huge number of people, not necessarily Christians, in these sciences who actually have come to the conclusion that there is a creator, just as the video was saying. There's now significant scientists starting to consider that seriously. What about the decay of the Earth's magnetic field? Now, this is a really important one, because the Earth is meant to have, the Earth's magnetic field's very slowly decaying. Dr. Thomas Barnes, the Emeritus Professor of Physics at the University of Texas, El Paso, has published a definitive work in this field. Scientific observations since 1829 have shown that the Earth's magnetic field has been measurably decaying at an exponential rate. In other words, going quite quickly, demonstrating its half-life to be approximately 1,400 years. In practical application, its strength 20,000 years ago would have approximated that of a magnetic star. Under those conditions of a magnetic star, many of the atoms necessary for life processes could not form. These data pieces that demonstrate that the Earth's entire history is young within a few thousand years. That's actually a significant discovery that he made, because it actually says the Earth fits in more with a biblical description than with some scientific descriptions. Evolution violates science in some other areas as well. Let's have a look at this one. The second law of thermodynamics, which states that in all energy exchanges, if no energy enters or leaves the system, the potential energy of the state will always be less than that of the initial state, which is what was happening with the previous slide we looked at. This is also commonly referred to as entropy. Therefore, things should not be improving over time. They should be not improving, doing the opposite. The second one, the existence of living fossils, another scientific thing. For example, clams, starfish, shellfish, and snails still alive today, but are missing from intervening strata layers claimed to be 530 million years old. This is a shocker, because the claims are that there would be development of these things over millions of years, but in actual fact, these things are still here and haven't changed. It's a very interesting thought. Human artifacts. This is an interesting one. In terms of human artifacts, we find man-made artifacts. I can't read it on my sheet. Such as the hammer, the Cretaceous rock, a human sandal print with trilobite and Cambrian rock, human footprints and a handprint in Cretaceous rock again, point to the fact that all the supposed geologic periods actually occurred at the same time in the recent past. There's a number of these situations. In fact, there's one set of rock where there's a human footprint right next to a dinosaur footprint. That's impossible if you believe the evolutionary theory, because the two didn't live together according to that whole idea. So when I say footprints, you need to understand that these things happened in soft layers and became hard layers. It's not a footprint like I've left on here. You can't see that, okay? In terms of helium, I understand a little bit about gases because I was involved in rebuilding a cryogenics plant some years ago. Helium content in Earth's atmosphere, forgot to highlight that. Physicist Melvin Cook, a Nobel Prize medalist, found that helium-4 enters our atmosphere from solar wind and radioactive decay of uranium. At present rates... Oh, that's right, I'd forgotten. Thank you, Sean. He could see something on the screen I couldn't see. At present rates, our atmosphere would accumulate current helium-4 amounts in less than 10,000 years. So in other words, we don't have a really old Earth. Okay. And then Mendel's laws. Mendel's laws of genetics and their modern day refinements explain almost all physical variations observed in living things. And Mendel discovered that genes, units of hereditary life, are merely reshuffled from one generation to another. So they don't keep developing, is what he's saying. Different combinations are found, not different genes. The different combinations produce many variations within each kind. So it doesn't change it, it just brings variations of each kind of life, such as in the dog family. There's different types of dogs, and most of those have just been variations. They've not had significant change at all, as would be expected. Mount St. Helens. Mount St. Helens is a really interesting case, because in Mount St. Helens, we find this whole deal in a matter of days. Mount St. Helens, by the way, I think it was 1975, wasn't it? It blew up in America, and they knew it was going to blow. It was a volcano, and so they'd put probes in and cameras in and all sorts of stuff. So the scientific community were rallying. This is a great day for them when it blew. Apart from the poor guy who decided to stay on the mountain. In a matter of days, a canyon, when Mount St. Helens blew, on a smaller scale than the Grand Canyon was formed, but it was still very large. Previously, this was considered impossible and theoretically should have taken millions of years to develop. The structures are identical in nature to the Grand Canyon and other Earth structures. 2 years later, this is what had evolved after 2 years. An underwater plantation had appeared in the bottom of a lake filled with trees, giving the appearance that the lake had only formed recently. In actual fact, the trees had got banged off from the blast. A lot of them rooted out. The ones with the roots still on them dropped into the lake. They dropped to the bottom because the weight of the roots pulled them, so they're all standing in the lake. And then what happened, all the trees that were floating were rubbing together like this. And so that all the logs were rubbing together in the water and the wind and storms and that. They rubbed together. All the bark rubbed off those ones. And the bark dropped to the bottom and covered the roots of the trees. This is important. And then the logs that were there, a whole lot of stuff, leaves and all sorts of stuff came on top of those. This all happened within 2 years. And it created an island that was thought to have taken many hundreds and even maybe millions of years to form. At the bottom of the lake where the bark went, that formed a thing that you may have heard of and seen on television now and again called peat. Peat was thought to have taken millions of years to develop. This peat, it turned out, actually had occurred, and it was at significant depths, covering the roots of trees, so it looked like the trees had actually been growing and then a lake had formed, and it was the other way around. And this all happened within 2 years. The canyon no longer looked new and would have been considered very old based on previous theories relating to development of earth structures of this nature. Sedimentary layers were thought to take millions of years to form. And the sedimentary layers that formed there, that were thought to take millions of years just for not very deep layers, in an afternoon, one afternoon of that explosion, the sedimentary layers that were formed were 7.5 meters deep. It's meant to have taken millions of years, and it happened in an afternoon with one explosion. Another anomaly is a new rock dated at 0.35 million years old, which had only just formed because of the explosion. Brand new rock. Because of lava that flowed down. We even have it here in New Zealand. Mount Narohoe, when it blew, and it blew in 1949, then I think about 3 times in 1954, and then again in 1975. Somebody took some of the lava from that and got it dated, and it was dated by the dating people between 0.27 million years old and 3.5 million years old, and yet it was brand new. We've got to realise the information we're being given is not true. Fortunately, as was shown on the video, there are some scientists coming to their sense. So when we look at these things, the greatest science opportunity destroyed a lot of evolutionary thinking in one blast. In Job 38 verse 4 it says, "Where were you when I laid the earth's foundations? Tell me if you understand." People like to think they can get back into history and understand. But God asked the question, where were you? He was telling people off at that point for being so arrogant to suppose that they knew. And I think there's a good point for all of us here. We sometimes think we know more than we do. And he made known to us the mystery of his will according to his good pleasure, which he purposed in Christ, to be put into effect when the times will have reached their fulfillment, to bring all things in heaven and earth together under one head, under Christ, even Christ. So what this is saying, and it's tied in with some other passages, what this is really saying is at the end of the day, God has an intention and a purpose. We just need to understand that. It's under Christ. So I want to talk about God's creation, a case for creation. People have rubbished the Bible over the years, but archaeologists after archaeologists over the last few hundred years have proven time and time again the accuracy of the Bible. Vivian's sitting here in the congregation. She used to lecture about the Roman period around the time of Christ. She also lectured in Latin and Greek, but don't worry about that stuff. And she can tell you about some of the historical stuff that was thought not to have been true, but actually has now been established as actual fact. The Bible was accurate on every one of those occasions. Even when they thought they'd found somewhere else, found the place the Bible mentioned somewhere else and it wasn't as big as it should be, it turned out it wasn't actually where they thought it was somewhere else. And they did find it eventually, and one of them was the stables of Solomon. Huge, thousands and thousands of horses, and they said, no, it's impossible, but they've found the stables now. So archaeology has actually proven this stuff. What about the testimony of transformed lives? That behaviour is not meant to be down there, by the way. I don't know what I did. Peace and joy. The social impact that my life and many other lives, the lives here and many of you in this room, where our morals and our behaviour have been changed dramatically because of a living Christ. It doesn't happen just because of a socially interactive group. There has to be much more than that. Because if that was the case, every group that met in society, called like Rotary Club and Lions or all those ones, which I'm not critical of, they would have far greater improved lives just by hanging out together, if that was the case. But it's not. It's because there is a foundation that God has given us that gives us a moral base. God made you and me to be in a relationship with Him, and that's the bottom line. For He chose us in Him before the creation of the world to be holy and blameless in His sight. In love, He predestined us to be adopted as His, actually it should be children. I forgot to retranslate that because it doesn't just say sons. Through Jesus Christ in accordance with His pleasure and will. Amen? You see, that's the deal that God's looking at for each one of us. So I just want to suggest that for every one of us here, this may have begun for some of you a journey of saying, oh my goodness, I've been duped. I've been sucked in. I've been taken out. No, you haven't. God knew you were going to be here today. You might have been fooled for a season, but at the end of the day, God calls us and He invites us and He wants us to be in a relationship with Him. But you know the importance of this, and the thing I want to finish with here this morning? If this is real, which I'm proposing it is, a relationship with God, then it is absolutely imperative that we actually do what it demands of us. So we start living differently. We start loving differently. We start being people who are going to honor God in everything we do. Because the fact of the matter is that for some of us sitting in this room, and that includes some of us who claim to be Christians, if Jesus should turn up right now this afternoon, some of us are in deep trouble. Because the implications of a created God making us and then calling us and inviting us to be in a relationship with Him are absolutely clear. Now, I know in today's society, absolute truth is not considered to be truth. That's because society doesn't want it to be, because if God says, don't do this or I'm going to send you to hell, people say, I don't believe in hell. But some people don't believe a train is going to run over them if they drive across the tracks when it's coming. The train driver will stop. I hate to tell you, but the momentum of that train means it takes at least 1 kilometre to 2 kilometres to stop a train. And when God says this is going to happen, it's going to happen. He doesn't put the brakes on to try and rescue one person if they're choosing not to respect Him. And so my proposal to you here this morning is that if you claim to be a follower of Jesus, you need to work it out. That means no slackness, no mucking around, no fooling around, that you live the life that's worth living. And I tell you what, it's far more exciting to live like that than to carry guilt around with you. That's the way it is. That's what God wants from us. This is a created God who didn't just make things just for the hang of it. He did it for His pleasure. And because He wanted, when He made us as humans, the Bible says this quite clearly in numerous places, He wants a relationship with us for eternity. That's what He's calling for. And some of you here this morning claim to be Christians, and some of you don't. And I respect the fact you've come here. I deeply respect you. Because I didn't have quite the same courage as you guys did to turn up. I got dragged along to a church when I was a young guy. I got dragged along, and I got freaked out by this particular church we went to, and I never wanted to really go. But my friend, he kept me going, and he took me to a little bit quieter place. And a church I'd gone to, and I'd sung in the choir and that. But the change that Jesus made to me when I met Him is just phenomenal. What does it cost us? Let me tell you something this morning. It costs us everything. I mean everything. It doesn't cost us a little. We can't afford to live slack. It costs us everything. But I have no regret about the cost at all. Because the gains I made against the cost, in balance, if I look at it, here was what I lost. Put it in a box. This is what I gained. And I can't even measure it. I am amazed that a God would love me and want to change me and want to work with me. And I'd love you to know the same experience, the same depth of that relationship. And if you are not yet a follower of Jesus, I want to invite you this morning to say, Lord, I'm willing to be a follower. And I'm going to give you the opportunity to be able to say, okay, Jesus, there's two ways you can do this. There's the chicken's way, or there's the bold way. The chicken's way is saying, okay, Jesus, I'm going to follow you. Whether it'll happen or not is probably unlikely. But if you make some kind of statement of faith, and you tell some others, or in this case, I'm going to get the guys to play the video thing again and get Ben to do the same thing if we can do it again, guys. Just finish off. Don't you agree it'd be a good thing to do? Yeah. Just help us reflect.
If we can think about that, and if you would like to be a follower of Jesus, or you're a person who's a Christian and you've been messing around, you haven't really been serving God, your heart's not been with Jesus, you've even been possibly even critical of other Christians or messing around or whatever, I'm giving you an opportunity while that video is being played this morning and you are awed by the creation that God's made with all the stars and everything He's given. I'm going to get you to come down the front here. I'm going to be available with some others to look after you. Make sure you get the best. There's a couple of people in the building here, and you've been looking at me. I know who two of you are. There's probably others. And you think I'm looking at you. I promise I haven't looked at you directly. I just look out over the congregation, but look, this morning you have caught my eyes. Because you reacted every time I looked at your direction. So I'm purposely keeping my eyes closed now so nobody's getting that, okay? I know God's speaking to you. Walk with Him. Discover what I've discovered. Know what I know. Because it's worth it.